Hello, everyone. Once again, we are back in Revelation, beginning at chapter 11. When two witnesses appear on earth during the tribulation. People are often speculating when the tribulation and rapture will occur. The rapture can take place at any time. The tribulation, though, has stipulations. One of those is found in verse 1 of chapter 11. Let me read that verse. The Apostle John says, I was given a reed like a measuring rod and was told, go and measure the temple of God. What does that tell all of us? It says that nothing will happen until the temple is rebuilt in Israel. The Jews are very aware of this requirement and have been building everything off-site that they can. My husband and I saw that place they were working when we visited Israel in 2012. I understand all that building is now complete. All they need is the temple. What will happen at this temple? Many things. But in verse 2, God says, the outer court of the temple has been given to the Gentiles, and they will trample on the holy city for 42 months, or 3.5 years. During this time, God will send two witnesses, which confirms the story about them in Zechariah chapter 4, verses 11 to 14. Why two? Here's what God says in Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9. Quote, 2 are better than 1. End quote. I think so too. I'm married to the other one. Also remember that Jesus sent his disciples 2 by 2 in Mark chapter 6, verse 7. So, who are these two witnesses? The Bible doesn't say. What it does say is they will prophesy for 1,260 days, or again, 3.5 years. Think about that. God has, by this time, raptured his people. Yet, he is giving those remaining on earth one more chance to be saved. And he's giving them 3.5 years to do it. Doesn't that show what a caring person God is? While the witnesses are on earth, God will protect them. He tells us in verse 5, if anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. Above all, God has given these two men immense powers while they're on earth. Power to prevent rain, power to turn water to blood, and power to bring a plague on earth as often as they want. The purpose of that power is to get the attention of skeptics in hopes salvation will come to them, and punishment for the people's disobedience. As much as God wants to save everyone, his patience does eventually run out. He lets us know that at the end of their testimony, a beast comes up from Satan's abyss and attacks the witnesses, overpowering and killing them. Their bodies will lie in the street for 3.5 days, and men from every tribe, language, and nation will, quote, gaze on their bodies and refuse them burial, end quote. Think now, it isn't possible for people around the world to see this had satellites not been developed. Were they allowed to be developed for God's purposes? That makes sense to me. We are told in verse 10 that all these people, all the inhabitants of the world, will gloat over the two witnesses and will celebrate by sending each other gifts, because these two prophets, in their opinion, had tormented those who live on the earth. We have to stop now and picture this setting. People will rejoice because these, quote, right-wing zealots alerting the world that the end is coming are now dead. And everyone sees a victory here against God. Imagine all those "I told you so" coming from non-believers to those who might have decided positively for God. Can't you just see that happening? Aren't Christians today afraid to really stand up for God, since there is already so much anti-God sentiment everywhere? But Satan is not and will not be victorious. The book of Revelation was given to us so we can be assured of that. All scoffers will be defeated in the end. Remember that. Here's the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. In verse 11, we are told, quote, "But after 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered the two witnesses, and they stood on their feet, and terror struck those who saw them," end quote. Imagine being in that group laughing at God's defeat, only to watch these two come to life. How could anyone explain that? Then it gets even more exciting. In verse 12, these people will hear a loud voice from heaven saying to the two witnesses, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud, just as Jesus did at the ascension. All the while, the enemies looked on. Then a severe earthquake came, and 1/10 of the city collapsed. 7,000 people were killed, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven, end quote. Hooray! That sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But to my amazement, as it should be to yours, all of this proof from God of his existence still didn't convince many. How can that be? Apparently, when Satan invades some people, nothing moves them. Sadly, I'm seeing that today in our own country, where I have never before seen so much evil. Thanks for listening. I believe we have to know all of this in order to witness, because some whom we love will experience this on earth. They were left behind in the rapture, but need to know this information so they can be saved in the tribulation, even though we all along hoped they'd be saved before the rapture. Please pray for the peace of Israel, and pray for a world that is stepping further and further away from Christ. See you Thursday.